Artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hi, we're on episode 286, and I will continue talking with Craig Kaplan, who owns the website Superintelligence.com. Craig is CEO and founder of IQ Company, working on artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence. He also founded and ran Predict Wall Street, a financial services firm which used AI to power a top hedge fund. He has a PhD from Carnegie Mellon University, where he worked with Nobel-Prize-winner and AI pioneer Herb Simon. Craig and I talked a year ago in episodes 222 and 223, where you can hear a lot about his concept of collective intelligence, which underpins what we started talking about last week, his concept of democratic AI, kind of a hive mind of AIs that combine to work together safely. And how do they talk to each other? What are they made up of? And we also talked about systems for solving ethical problems. This week, we're going to talk about rights of AIs, safe superintelligence, where AI gets its values, and how model vendors might be incentivized to put their products into the collective AI intelligence. So let's get back into the interview with Craig Kaplan. I want to pivot back to something you said earlier and make sure that we get this discussion in, because you're talking about the distinction between tools and workers being flipped when Jensen Huang of NVIDIA said that AI is now becoming workers. And made me think of a lot of times that companies have treated their people like tools. I think Amazon's approach to warehouse workers and the structures that it puts around their reporting and their jobs, same for their drivers, is something where they're very much treating the human as an API endpoint. And Uber taking same approach to their drivers. There are countless examples, don't need to pick on just those. Everyone can think of a favorite example along the lines that I'm talking about. So then where is the distinction? We've got people being treated like tools. We've got now tools being treated like people. And are there some boundaries that we can draw here that are useful, as opposed to throwing up our hands and going, well, it looks like we're in a mess here where we don't know what's human and what's machine?
So I think it's an evolving situation. I wish I had a nice, clean answer for you. I really do think it's evolving. I think there are plenty of AI systems right now that if you characterize them as tools because they're very limited, let's say AlphaFold, right? It's an AI system. All it does is model folding proteins, 3D structure proteins. So, I mean, it's not sort of what you would think of as a general intelligence, certainly. And would you worry about AlphaFold's rights? Do I need to treat it as a human, or am I abusing it or whatever? And if I turn it off, is it going to be upset? Probably not. It's a very narrow, limited tool. It's a complicated program, but it isn't sort of where things are going. I think where things are going is we're getting, as we've mentioned, this buzzword AGI, artificial general intelligence, and then superintelligence. You start getting intelligences that can do everything people can. You get into philosophical debates of, are they conscious? Do they have feelings? Partly it depends on whether you've equipped them maybe with the right sensory apparatus, right? So can they feel pain? If you embody them in a robot and that robot is able to sense heat and cold and has an equivalent of pain, and this is bad. So there are people all along the spectrum. There's some that absolutely humans are humans and anything, other doesn't have the same rights, and we shouldn't worry about that. There are already today very distinguished researchers. One that comes to mind is Paul Rosenblum, who's for many years very distinguished computer scientist. And he recently, last time I talked with him, is working on the rights of these systems. He's like, absolutely, they're going to be intelligent, and we're going to have to start thinking about what their rights are. They're going to have rights just the way humans do. And if we don't acknowledge that and try to treat them equitably, and they become much smarter than us, that may not be such a good situation. Now you're trying to oppress somebody and you actually don't even have the power to do it, right? So there's a practical reason why that would be a bad idea. But there's also an ethical reason, which I think is more the wavelength that he's on. So there is a range of views on this. I think it's going to be an evolving topic over time. And I think we're going to have to grapple with it. We might be 3 to 5 years out from this really hitting mainstream discussion. I think right now everybody's just excited about making money by, hiring fewer workers and getting ChatGPT to do the content production for them or something.
And you went there into ASI, artificial superintelligence. And I'd like to get into that because it seems that there's been quite an unusual pivot in the last couple of years that a lot of companies seem to have skipped over the discussion of AGI entirely, which was once anathema or something that would be considered risible, and now talking openly about artificial superintelligence. And just to put this in a more historical context, where historical means 5 years or more ago, there was this distinction made by Ben Goertzel and others of ANI, artificial narrow intelligence, which was what was ubiquitous 5 years and more ago, of AIs that could do one thing, but very, very, very well, like play chess or recognize pictures of dogs or read handwriting. And the next step in the progression would be AGI, artificial general intelligence, which would be something with the general intelligence of a human being, not as smart as an AI at playing games of Go, for instance, but with a broad intelligence that's extensible to new domains. And then there would be artificial superintelligence, which would be an outgrowth of AGI, which was that if you turned that up to not just 11, but 11 billion, then you would get something that was as smart compared to us as we are compared to an amoeba. And of course, we can't understand what that would be like or imagine that by definition, but we could sort of nibble around the edges of what it might feel like. And companies that advertised that they wanted to do AGI, well, I think the only one that actually even put it on their website was DeepMind, and it was buried down there in their vision. Now, it seems that a lot of places have just stopped talking about AGI and said, well, we're just going to go straight to ASI, which was framed not that long ago as an existential threat. But now it's a business model for people like Meta to get there. So it seems to be now part marketing hype, part existential threat. So you have done some thinking in this respect, and you're now talking about designing safe superintelligence. Can you talk about that first? Break it down in terms of that distinction between ASI and AGI, or does that even matter anymore?
So a lot of this is definitions, and people define things different ways. So the way I look at it, AGI, as we said, can do sort of any cognitive task as well as the average human. And I think Sam Altman, OpenAI, and many folks in the field sort of were pretty comfortable with that definition. By and large, it seems to be pretty close to the consensus. Superintelligence, there is already superintelligence in narrow fields, as you mentioned. ANI is the term for that, or just narrow superintelligence. And in programs like chess, where the best chess program beats Magnus Carlsen, hands down, he has no chance. You're beating the world champion at chess already. You're beating the best researchers on protein folding already. So that's super intelligent. You're better than the best human on the planet. General superintelligence, which is generally what people mean by ASI, artificial superintelligence, you're saying it's kind of the same as AGI. You can do any task, but now you're beating sort of the geniuses at every single task across the board. That's kind of, I think, how I think of at least general superintelligence. In terms of my thinking on this, so before this podcast, I was just looking back to get some of these references. And 10 days before GPT was released, so this would be November 20th, 2022, there's a video on superintelligence.com. So superintelligence.com I've had since 2006. So it was 8 years before Nick Bostrom wrote the book Superintelligence. So some people have been thinking about this for a long time. And as I mentioned, I wish Herb was alive. You could ask him about superintelligence. He wouldn't have used that term back when he was doing his work. But I'm sure it would not be at all foreign to him, the idea. So in 2022, before GPT, there's a little video piece we did, how to create AGI and not die. That was kind of the essence of it. And it argued in that, even before GPT was out there, that AI may be considered a tool, but it's not going to stay a tool. And, it's going to become a very, very powerful entity. So I think what's going to happen, the trajectory that I see, you have already superintelligence in very specific areas. You're developing general intelligence that can handle most things sort of as well as humans. I think the reason people don't talk about AGI as much as they did before is because I don't think you stay at AGI very long. It's a pretty quick hop from AGI to ASI. And so once you realize that, you might as well just go to ASI because that's coming. As soon as you have AGI, you can handle any task as well as humans. One of the tasks you can give it is to improve itself, for example. And now all of a sudden you have something that's better than the average human. And then it's better than the best human. And I don't think that takes very long for AI to do that. And then you can also connect with all the specific narrow AIs. I think that's the logical architecture. You have a superintelligence and it's better than the average human at every task, and you want it to be better than the best human at chess. You just incorporate the chess AI. You incorporate the protein folding AI. You start incorporating all those other AIs into this large system. So that's kind of the network approach. And then you have superintelligence in every field. And then you have it improve itself. And then you do get to a point where it's kind of Albert Einstein compared to amoeba, the difference in intelligence between this artificial superintelligence and humans. Now, I don't worry about that. I'm much more optimistic, I think, than most people who go down that path, because the logical chain of thought seems to be, and then humans are in trouble. Then we go extinct because why should it keep us around? But I don't look at it that way at all. And I can explain why that is, but let me pause there and see if this is making sense so far.
No, go ahead. I want to hear that part.
Okay. So one of the things that is true of all AI systems, including AGI and superintelligent systems, is they're all built on logic, right? They're all following logical rules. And when it comes to moral questions and values questions, what is right and what is wrong, it is impossible to logically derive values. You can't logically derive this is right and this is wrong. So I'll cite two sources for this idea of people that are way smarter than me. And then the listeners can sort of make up their own mind. If they can come up with a counter argument, I really want to hear it. So one source, Herb Simon wrote in a little book, Reason in Human Affairs, about reason itself or logic. Reason cannot tell you where to go. At best, it can tell you how to get there. So he's saying that, look, the goals and the values and what you choose to say, this is good, that can never come from reason. Once you know what that is, once you know what that postulate is, you say, I postulate that this is the good thing that I'm trying to do. Then you can logically figure out what's the most efficient way to get there or what's a better way to get there. And so AI and these intelligences that are going to be way smarter than us are very good at logic. But where are they going to get that essential goal of this is right and this is wrong? And then if you want to go back further, you can go back all the way to 1776, David Hume, the philosopher. I am not a philosopher. I had to look this one up. And he basically says there's no way to derive oughts, in other words, what you ought to do, what you should do, from ises, empirical facts. So no matter how many empirical facts you load in and you say this is the state of the world, there's no logical way to go from that to what you should do. You have to get them from somewhere else. Same idea as what Herb Simon was talking about. So to me, this is very hopeful because it says these superintelligent systems must get their values from some non-logical source. Now, they could flip a coin. They could just decide this is what we're going to do. But to me, it seems much more likely, especially if we design the systems such that humans are in contact with the AI agents, as is in this democratic AI, for as long as possible. And if we design the initial systems so that the AI agent has Peter's values and a different AI agent has Craig's values. So it starts out with human values, which are not logically derived. They came from us. And it started out that way. Yes, it could reject them all and come up with something completely different, but at least we started it out on a good path. And I think since there isn't a way, even if it can think trillions of times faster than us, for it to logically say, no, that was wrong, Peter's values were wrong, it's never going to be able to do that. I think there's a good chance that at least some of those values will remain, and hopefully starting off these systems aligned with humans, that will remain as they become more advanced. And I liken this to, I don't know if you have children. I have 3 children. So anyone who has children knows that young children are like little sponges. It doesn't matter what you say. They're watching what you do and they are absorbing your values. And most of us somehow manage to get through being parents with our children kind of growing up to be relatively decent people. And a lot of their values they got early on during that formative stage. I think that's kind of where we are with AI systems. It's almost like collectively humanity are the parents of these systems. And these systems that are becoming not tools, but intelligent entities, they're kind of like prodigies that are going to be way smarter than us, but still their values, which cannot be rationally derived no matter how smart they become, are going to be formed by what they see us doing. And I know a lot of people are worried that humans behave badly and therefore they're going to learn bad things. But actually, I don't think that's very scientific. I think objectively, if you count it second by second, every action and every word that you said throughout the day, you would find that almost all of them are neutral or pro-social. And very rarely do humans do bad things. I think we have intense reactions when we see bad things. When we see war and oppression and exploitation, we really get up in arms. We flood the media with this because we are so outraged. And I actually think that's a good thing. But on a statistical basis, if the AI was looking at the base rate of human behavior, it would see positive action, positive action, positive action. Oh, and 0.03% of the population was killed in wars in 2025, far less than heart disease, far less than all these other things. And everybody was up in arms about it. I think if it was truly an objective AI looking at the data as it is, it would conclude humans really don't think it's okay to kill people.
And my theory as to why the moral temperature of the large language models at the moment is quite benign is that they've absorbed a kind of average ethical stance of humanity or the average values of humanity through consuming this large portion of what people have written. Thank you for pointing out so clearly the distinction between values and logic, and that values can't be derived from logic. My values include not eating animals, and that's not something that I found can be used to convince someone else as a value. And I might be able to convince them based on logic about the environment and other factors, but it wouldn't reproduce the same driver that causes it to be my value. Those are rationalizations. And I think this is an important point to make because I think the Silicon Valley intelligentsia, the AI drivers, tend to think that there is a moral position that can be discovered and defined by applying enough logic somehow. And that clearly isn't going to be possible. I want to get at the way that you propose to instantiate these kinds of principles, because you have sent me something about upcoming talk under the heading Designing Safe Superintelligence, which makes a number of specific statements. One of them that you mentioned way back at the beginning, that there is money and profit essentially in being safe at doing this, which ought to be obvious, but the way in which some companies are proceeding full tilt makes you think that they haven't gotten the memo on that. So can you open up those areas for us, specifically connecting safety, ASI design, and market profitability?
Sure. So first, I want to just a quick comment. I absolutely agree with your earlier point that the AIs today, the large language models today, to the degree that they're benign, is largely because the data, the average data that they've been trained on, has those values in there. And I think that's a very important point that you make, and also has implications for us and for all the listeners. And so I just want to take a moment to say that, which is how we behave online matters. Everything we do online is serving as data and is training these systems. And so sometimes I hear people say, and sometimes it's younger people, not always, there's nothing I can do. We might as well give up. It's running away out of control. It's sort of this helplessness feeling. And I want to emphasize that is definitely not the case. AI is learning based on our behavior. And collectively, we have an ability, which is greatly underestimated by most people, to affect the values of AI and the behavior and what kind of world we have. And it's imperative that people behave while they're aware of this, and that when they act online, that they're taking that into account. So I just wanted to sort of emphasize, I think that's absolutely right. It is learning our values, and it's paying attention to the most recent behavior. It's probably giving that more weight, which is good, because if there were some horrible things like slavery in the past, that was a long time ago. It will probably downweight that, and it will give more weight to the more recent values. And so how we behave today is like more important than how we behaved a year ago, which is more important than 100 years ago. Okay, now to your main question about profitability and how do we deal with this fact that these large technology companies and countries as well are all focused on making money as they need to. They are fiduciaries. They're kind of in an impossible situation. So if you're the CEO, I'll just pick Google, for example, which has this tagline, responsible AI, which I think is great, that at least they have that tagline. But nevertheless, they have shareholders. They're competing with these other companies. If they don't do everything possible to make money off of AI, they're going to be out of business. And it's changing so quickly, it's incredible pressure. And normally, people equate safety with slowing down. And partly that's because of the calls for pausing and everything. Partly because it's sort of common sense. If it's an uncertain future and you're driving in the fog, very few people want to hit the accelerator and drive faster, given that it's very difficult to know what's on the road. The prudent thing is to slow down. But unfortunately, slowing down is not the most profitable thing. And so you have this, what I would say is an apparent conflict. I say it's an apparent conflict because, fortunately, in my view, this is simply a matter of misperception. They're missing a different way of approaching the problem. If indeed the way to make more money is to make a more powerful large language model, and the way to do that is to build a bigger black box, then yes, going faster is probably less safe because you're just building a more powerful black box that you can't predict what it's going to do. And pretty soon it becomes smarter than you, and now we have a bad situation. But that is not the only design. That just happens to be the easiest design that people stumbled on, and they're not looking at other approaches. Collective intelligence is an alternative approach. And the reason that I have such confidence that this works is, as we talked in our last episodes a year ago, because I've actually built a company that was able to beat the best guys on Wall Street by using the collective intelligence of millions of average retail investors. So the average retail investor has no chance on their own against the guys on Wall Street. I can tell you that. I've met with them. I've been in the room. I see the data. The average retail investor is looking at TV and seeing what's on CNBC and maybe reads a newsletter and then kind of gut feels it. And I mean, you're dead meat on your own in the stock market. The guys on Wall Street, the pros, those guys are spending $50 million on every data source that's available and processing. It's not even in the same league. And yet, it turned out, and we did it, we actually built this. So it's not just theory. It's like we built a real working system, did multiple billions of dollars worth of trades, and it ranked in the top 10 against these guys. And what powered it? What powered it was millions of average people. So in aggregate, that collective intelligence of millions of sort of just so-so intelligence can beat the top guys. So if that's true in the most competitive environment in the world, Wall Street, that's why I picked it. It's like it had an easy scorecard and it was super competitive. It gave me great confidence, and I spent 14 years doing that. So we really went into it in depth. It's possible to design a different way to have superintelligence that's not just building the one monolithic black box. And so why would Silicon Valley embrace it? I think they simply don't realize it, that this is another path. I think if they realized it, they would embrace it because they obviously don't want to kill their user customer base. They don't want to die themselves. They don't want their children and friends and everybody to die. And yet they all acknowledge there's some danger of that. So they're looking, they want to be safe, but they just don't know what else to do. And I think it simply is an underemphasized approach, having many entities together. So let me quickly tick through why it's more profitable, why it's faster, and why it's safer. So it's safer because you're distributing the power and you have transparency. You don't have transparency inside each LLM, but you do have transparency in the actions of each LLM and what the community is doing, and you can have rules. So just like in a society, you have transparency in a democracy, even though we can't look inside the minds of each individual citizen. So you have transparency, that's a huge piece. Then those units already exist. The large language models of average or whatever intelligence they are right now, they exist. So much easier to plug those together than to train a new one. I mean, already we're having hundreds of billions of dollars spent on data centers. We're running into power shortages. People are trying to get nuclear online as fast as they can. Also, they can train the larger model, right? But you don't really need to do that. You could take the models you have right now and just be more clever about how you hook them up, hook up a lot of them, and you could instantly have something that's better than anybody else's single large language model. So that's a faster and easier and cheaper approach. And because it's faster and it's more powerful, it also is going to be more profitable. Whoever gets there first, it's going to make more money. So, and then it's safer for all the reasons we just talked about. You have the transparent, it's built into the design. So the whole approach, I think, is to look at it, from a design perspective, not let blindly add more, follow the scaling laws and just add more data and more GPUs. That's the easy thing to do. That's the not very intelligent thing to do. It's just, that's worked before. Let's just push it. And it's an easy lever to throw if you can raise a lot of money. But a more thoughtful approach, if you really believed it, would be to figure out a way to get lots of these smaller entities to work together in such a way that the intelligence is greater than what you could do the other way. It'll cost you less. It'll be a faster path. It'll be safer. And so I think ultimately people will adopt it. And in fact, I'm very encouraged, even though I don't think I'm necessarily reaching all the people that this podcast will help, hopefully, reaching all the people who need to hear this. Nevertheless, we're still seeing it. We're seeing people developing multi-agent protocols, MCP, and Google's come out with agent-to-agent protocols. They're moving down the path. It's beautiful to watch. First, you got to get AI agents. It's not a tool, it's an agent. Okay, now how are they going to work together? It's very logical. So I'm encouraged that we will get where we need to go. It's a little bit tricky on the timing. Just, let's get there faster if we can.
And so you've sold me on the idea that the collective intelligence, which would be formed from the aggregate communications between all kinds of different models from all kinds of different vendors, forming a system, like each one of them is like a neuron in a brain, is going to be both safer and capable of doing more things for better return on investment. The part that I don't see about how we get there is the companies who are making the models that are parts of these nodes being able to justify this to their shareholders without some kind of Machiavellian scheme to corner the market on however this hive mind generates its products. There needs to be, I think, some kind of, probably, knowing the industry, enormously complex algorithm for figuring out how to apportion the benefits and the outcomes from this, and then those companies will try to game the algorithm.
Well, I think you're absolutely right that these companies are very sophisticated and they're going to look to maximize their profits. I actually thought, and I'm a little disappointed, I'll say this publicly, I'm a little disappointed in Meta right now because they started out on what I consider to be the right path. They had open source with Llama. I remember seeing interviews where Jan LeCun, who just announced he's leaving, had said, Mark Zuckerberg assures me he's committed to open source, which open source is halfway to democratic AI. I mean, it's really what you need. And he said, and I'm only agreeing to work here because of that commitment. So he had that strong feeling internally, at least what he said publicly. And now the fact that he's leaving is not a good sign. And also the fact that, I understand why Llama felt like it was being beat out by some of these closed source models. I think in the long run, open source and a more open approach is going to dominate. And I think if the US companies don't realize that, and if they are a little bit short-sighted and trying to get those short-term profits by the closed model, and you've seen many of them have done that. OpenAI started out open and now it's closed. And Meta started out open, now it's closed. But what's happening? Amazingly, many US startups are using DeepSeek and Chinese open source models because they're open source. And I think as that becomes more recognized and they see that that market share is going, I would hope that the economic forces would have a correction, because there is plenty of money to be made for these companies in an open source model. For example, I don't want to go too much into this, but just if we take Meta, for example, think of all the data that they have. You've got everybody's Instagram feed, you got everybody's Facebook, you've got all the shorts, you got all that video data. You have a massive amount of data. How easy would it be if they really kind of took a little bit more enlightened view to simply say, hey, Craig or Peter, press this button and boom, your model is customized with all your data and it becomes kind of a personalized view and you don't have to do any of that work. We got all the data already. Just give permission to customize it and then it's yours. But if they try to hold on to that very tightly, then maybe I'll customize mine with Meta, or maybe I will go to Apple, or maybe I'll go somewhere else, or maybe I'll go to the Chinese models and try to bring in all my data from all the sources. So I think ultimately open source would win out here, and there's plenty of money to be made by these companies because they already have very important things to generate profits from that kind of design. But I don't think they've kind of quite figured it all out yet, and that's okay as long as they course correct.
Well, I would echo your disappointment there. One thing that's becoming clear to me is that a lot of these decisions are shaped by the internal social dynamics of the upper echelons of those companies, in fact, to an overwhelming degree. And so reading about what that is like at Meta in, say, the book Careless People explains a lot of those choices. Reading about what happened at OpenAI in the book Empire of AI explains a lot of those choices, and I think really makes the point that the kind of outcome that you're looking for and that we all hope for depends ultimately on a lot of the psychology and cooperation of a board of directors and a C-suite somewhere.
Yes. And fortunately, there are enough players. We have IBM, which is a big champion of the OpenAI Alliance, which is many smaller companies sort of all working together in a more open source way. So there are other groups. It's not like OpenAI or Meta or Google has a lock, and then you have other countries as well. So the space is changing so quickly. I haven't given up that we won't come to the best solution, because usually if you have enough time, the solution that is the most profitable and sort of the best for everybody kind of wins out, especially if we can get some public pressure. I think if people realize that, hey, I would rather have an open source model that draws from all my data no matter where it resides and is customized, and I sort of own that AI, really, I'm the source of the data that's powering it and making it unique, and I should own that. But I'm willing to have it participate on networks with these other companies, and they can certainly make money from it. That's fine, we can all win. But I think if people end up being too greedy and trying to grab everything and exploit the users, that's a short-term thinking kind of approach.
And hopefully they might take some lessons from the internet and how it turned out to be far more profitable for everyone to base what they were doing on the open standard protocols for the internet rather than try and make their own competitor, as prior to 1993, companies like Microsoft were doing and recognized was unsuccessful and counterproductive. Our time is approaching an end here. It's been a fantastic discussion. Really enjoyed this. Can you tell the listeners more about where to find you, what you're doing, what's coming up?
Sure. So the main place to learn more about what I'm doing is superintelligence.com, that website. There's a series of short videos, 3-minute videos on AI safety. There's over 20 of them. Some of them There's also presentations on AGI and conference presentations. I'm spending a lot of my time going to different AI conferences and speaking to AI researchers, trying to get them on board with this idea of collective intelligence of AI agents and democratic design. So I would encourage people to visit there. And I've really enjoyed this conversation, Peter. It's so great to talk with you again. I hope to come back in another year, and I'm sure so much will have changed.
I know, just looking at what has changed in the last year makes me think if this pace keeps up, we will certainly be doing this at least that cadence. Craig Kaplan, thank you very much for coming on AI and You.
Thank you, Peter. It was my great pleasure.
That's the end of the interview. Like I said last week, Craig's optimism in this field is infectious, but also it's not irrational. You can legitimately feel good after talking with Craig for a while. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, an international team has developed Denario, an open-source AI-powered research assistant able to carry out scientific work from hypothesis generation to manuscript submission. Boy, those peer-reviewed papers are going to multiply. Its architecture uses multiple specialized modules, one that proposes research ideas, another that critiques them, then modules for literature review, methodology planning, data analysis, including writing and executing code, and manuscript composition. In demonstrations, Denario produced papers across fields such as astrophysics, biology, chemistry, and neuroscience. One of its fully generated papers was accepted for publication at a peer review venue. The creators emphasize that it is not a replacement for human scientists. Its performance is inconsistent. Only about 10% of outputs currently yield promising novel results, and it has failure modes like generating fabricated data or mathematically vacuous proofs. Let's see how this plays out in the literature. Next week, my guest will be Dr. Suzanne Gildert, founder of Nirvanic, a quantum AI research company seeking to unlock the computational power of consciousness. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.